A Mochi moment from Mark, who writes, I just want to thank you for making GLP-1s affordable. What would have been over $1,000 a month is just $99 a month with Mochi. Money shouldn't be a barrier to healthy weight. 3 months in, and I have smaller jeans and a bigger wallet. You're the best. Thanks, Mark. I'm Myra Ahmed, founder of Mochi Health. To find your Mochi moment, visit joinmochi.com.
Mark is a Mochi member compensated for his story.
Taking on a DIY job around the house is the ultimate summer project. But if your DIY home security system is a beware of dog sign, when your real pet is Princess the cat, that's safe-ish. To be actually safe, help protect your home with a DIY system from ADT. It's easy to install and gives you virtual assistance from ADT's technical support team. Best of all, you can tell everyone in the neighborhood you set it up yourself. Don't settle for safe-ish this summer. DIY with ADT instead. Visit ADT.com to learn more.
Welcome back to another episode of Investies. I'm your host, Linda Garcia, Texas State Representative and author of the book Wealth Warrior. This week on the podcast, we are going to review all of the inflation data that came in. We received a CPI report. We also received the PPI report. So we're going to get into all of those numbers. If you want a daily dose of economic content pertaining to the stock market on a much more granular level, join us over on Patreon at patreon.com/investies. Check out our opening bell tier. Before we get into breaking down inflation data from last week, I do want to first give you some updates. First, let's talk about how the market performed last week, much different than the performance the week before. All three indexes closed positive. Dow was up 97%. The S&P 500 was up 1.34%, and the NASDAQ was up 1.41%. The NASDAQ hit a new all-time record high. This is testament to what the market believes will take place next week. We will get into that in a bit as soon as we review the inflation data. I do want to give you another quick update that I feel is really important. We received a revision on the BLS report, the Bureau of Labor and Statistics. If you remember last week, we broke down this report. This was the report that I told you that I wasn't a fan of. And again, this is one of the reasons I am not a fan of this report, the revisions. Now, I do have to say that this revision is much bigger than any revision we've seen in over 20 years. In fact, the last time we've seen a revision this big was in 2002. There are so many flaws with the BLS report, starting with how backwards looking it is, most especially when we're looking at revisions. It's really hard to determine the future of the economy when we're dealing with stale data from a year ago and trying to mitigate that stale data. So here are the numbers. Here's the revision. We received a revision of 911,000 pertaining to job growth, meaning that last year we had accounted for almost 1 million jobs. And it turns out that that was not the case, that we actually had 911,000 jobs less than what we had accounted for. This is an extremely big adjustment. I already mentioned that. But I also want to take the time to reflect on how Trump did fire the commissioner, Erica McIntarfer, as he had accused her of manipulating the job numbers when it came to the time during his administration, and then also inflating the job growth during the Biden administration. I have to say that with this type of revision, and for it to not be common to have this type of revision. It is much bigger than the revisions that normally come in. So just so that I'm clear, we do anticipate revisions every year. However, a revision like this is definitely not normal. And so I just want to also be really clear when I am sharing information that this does in fact not reflect well on the former commissioner of the BLS report. One of the reasons why Fed Chair Powell had not cut interest rates is because labor was coming in strong. We had a strong labor market. And so when we have a strong labor market and we also have high inflation, the answer is never to cut interest rates because that just strengthens inflation. However, when you have a weakening labor market, then you want to consider cutting interest rates in order to strengthen the labor market. Now, Fed Chair Powell is going to have to make a decision based on damage that has been taking place for the last year and a half, let's say, because the report was from April of 2024 to March of 2025. Honestly, if this is not a good enough reason to put more energy and focus into improving the way we gather job growth data, then I don't know what is. I have been complaining about the BLS report for years now. And so I want you all to understand the difference between the BLS report and the ADP report, which is the report that I prefer to pay attention to. However, just because I prefer to pay attention to it doesn't mean anything, because the Fed favors the BLS report over the ADP report. I don't know how much weight, if any, he puts into the ADP report. The BLS report is comprised of data that is collected via a survey. And when I say a survey, I mean someone is actually doing this old school, picking up the phone, calling people to ask them questions on the labor market. They're calling people that are employees, and they're also calling business owners. And they're trying to gather all of this data from these people that have been hand-selected to give information. Now, there's also been reports that when they actually make these calls, it's getting harder and harder to collect this real-time data. We are all getting busier and busier. Imagine having to continuously speak to the Bureau of Labor and Statistics and answer their questions. It's becoming, I think, redundant. They're not getting all of the information in an adequate amount of time, which is also hindering the report itself. Now, when we look at the ADP report, this is actual data, actual numbers that are coming from payroll services. So every time they hire someone or a position is created, those numbers are coming in and a report is created. I mean, it's the future, you know? I just can't believe that this is the way we are still conducting reports and gathering data in a time where we are in the era of AI. Anyways, it really frustrates me because we are having to make very big decisions based on outdated data. And it is time for us to innovate our government. It is time for us to innovate the way we make decisions. But then again, we have the same old white men making the same old decisions. So there's that.
The family that vacations together stays together. At least, that was the plan. Except now, the dastardly desk clerk is saying he can't confirm your connecting rooms.
Wait, what?
That's right, ma'am. You have rooms 201 and 709.
No, we cannot be 5 floors away from our kids.
The doors have double locks. They'll be fine.
When you want connecting rooms confirmed before you arrive, it matters where you stay.
Welcome to Hilton. I see your connecting rooms are already confirmed.
Hilton, for the stay.
This episode is brought to you by Indeed. When your computer breaks, you don't wait for it to magically start working again. You fix the problem So why wait to hire the people your company desperately needs? Use Indeed's sponsored jobs to hire top talent fast. And even better, you only pay for results. There's no need to wait. Speed up your hiring with a $75 sponsored job credit at Indeed.com/podcast. Terms and conditions apply.
Let's go ahead and switch gears here and dive into the inflation data that was released for the month of August. Now, last week we received the PPI data and the CPI data. Let's break down PPI first. PPI stands for Price Producer Index, and this measures the cost of producing goods and services. So if the cost to produce goods and services increases, then what tends to happen is the retailer will take on that increase and then they will eventually pass it down to consumers. And then this creates the ripple effect of increasing inflation. During COVID, we saw the rapid increase of prices because we had so much liquidity in the market that the majority of America could sustain those price increases. This time around, it is not the same scenario. We're dealing with a completely different economic environment. Right now, we have companies across the country mitigating on how they are going to strategically implement these price increases. I say this because it's important for us to note that it is still really early for us to determine inflation based on tariffs. Now, in earnings reports, we are hearing a lot of our publicly traded companies talking about tariffs and the impact that is taking place right now. And so it is coming, but a lot of the retailers have yet to pass the cost on to the consumer. Now, in some cases, we have already began to see the prices increase, but in other cases, again, we are watching strategies on how they are going to implement the increases in prices. Now that we are all clear on what the PPI measures, let's take a look and see how it performed for the month of August. This was an incredible report. I was shocked when I saw it and also really excited because for the first time in a really long time, we saw a negative number. The actual number that came out was negative 0.1%. Analysts were anticipating an increase of 0.3%. And when we look at July, we came in at 0.7%. So to see a decrease of negative 0.1% is a big win. Most especially when our analysts weren't even anticipating this low of a number. So the negative 0.1% is much lower than what was anticipated. And of course, it was much lower than what we had for the previous month. Now, this is just looking at the month of August and comparing it to the increases of months prior. When we zoom out and look at the annual PPI, we are looking at a 2.6% increase at an annual rate. That's not terrible, but it's also not great. What we are looking for in an increase is 2%. That is the Fed's target. So this just tells us that inflation continues to be a problem for the economy. It's also important for us to understand that as these numbers come down, that doesn't mean that the prices of products are coming down. It just means that inflation isn't increasing at the velocity that it once was. And so it's not that we are going to see the prices that we saw pre-pandemic. I mean, that would be lovely. But when inflation is coming down, it just means that the velocity that we are increasing at is coming down. Now, if we see negative numbers, like we saw the negative number for the month, that actually can signal that prices would in fact be coming down. Too early to tell. It's just the numbers for the month. Let's continue to see how we do for the next few months, the next year, etc. Way too early to make that determination, but we do have a win for PPI in the month of August. Now let's take a look at the CPI numbers. CPI data is not looking as great as PPI. CPI data came in higher than analysts had expected for the month of August. Now, CPI stands for Consumer Price Index, and this measures the change in prices paid for goods and services over a period of time. This is actually measuring what we as consumers pay for at the retail level. CPI for the month of August increased by 0.4%. I just want us to take a moment here and reflect that on PPI, we had a negative 0.1%. Did we see the retailer pass on those savings to us? No, we did not. Why? I don't know the answer to this, but I do think it's important to ask these types of questions. And I think it's important for us to try and critically think through it. I do know that over and over in earnings calls, we did hear companies working on strategies on how they were going to pass on the tariff increases that they were seeing coming down the line. A lot of companies, of course, are already being affected. We did see an increase, 0.4%. I think that we were anticipating that CPI would also surprise us, like PPI surprised us. However, it did not. This is higher than what analysts had anticipated. We had a forecast of 0.3% from our Wall Street analysts, so this was definitely a miss. More concerning, though, I think, is that we had a 0.2% in the previous month, and so we doubled our increase in the month of August. I want to go ahead and share what was affected the most, just so you can kind of get a sense of what products are increasing. Let's take a look at some of our foods at home. We have roasted coffee that increased by 21.7% in cost, okay? Like, let's take a moment to reflect on that. This is the thing. When we are looking at these numbers, we're looking at an average of all of these products that they are measuring consistently. But when we look at the individual increases, some of them can really shock you. Uncooked beef steaks, 16.69% increase. Eggs, 10.9% increase. Apples, 9.6% increase. Candy and chewing gum, 8.1%. Bacon, 7.2%. Juices and drinks, 7.1%. Fish and seafood, 6.7%. Then if we drop down to utilities and electricity, in utilities, we saw a 13.8% increase. Electricity, 6.2%. In motor vehicle repair, we saw a 15% increase. Audio equipment, 12.2% increase. College textbooks, 12.2% increase. Furniture, 9.5% increase. Delivery services, 8.2%. Cigarettes, 7.7%. These are just some of the few items that I decided to call out. Of course, there is a crazy list of all of the increases in prices that we are experiencing as consumers. And I just find it really important that when I tell you we have CPI of 2.9% as an annual increase, that truly we're watching items kick up in some cases as much as double digits. And so the impact can feel a lot greater than just 2.9% on an annual basis. So, that's where we are at. We have Fed Chair Powell coming out with rate cuts. I really strongly believe he's going to go ahead and finally cut rates next week. It will be interesting to see how far he goes. I don't have a guess on what he's going to do. I would like to see him go ahead and cut 50 basis points or 0.50%, just based on the horrible job numbers and the horrible revision that we've seen. I think that there is a really big mess that he is needing to clean up ASAP. I think what we should pay attention to is if he goes for 25 basis points or if he goes for 50 basis points, that will determine how bad he feels about the market. So that will be something that we'll be paying attention to. Thank you so much for listening to Investies podcast. Hey, listen, I need you to do me a favor. If you haven't already, I need you to head over to Apple Podcasts and rate and review Investies. This means so much to us. It's a small token of appreciation. It will take you 5 minutes to do that. And the benefits for us are big. We get to reach more listeners. It says positive things about the show. So please, if you would be so kind to head over to Apple Podcasts, rate and review. Of course, if you're listening on another podcast player, we appreciate those reviews as well. Thank you so much for listening to the podcast. I'm your host, Linda Garcia. Investies is a Cosmic Standard production. A special thank you to the team, Asia Simpson, Eliza Smith, and Jacob Winnick.